That was my favorite class today. Today, boys and girls, in philosophy, we're going to talk about a general and a philosopher we know as Sun Tzu. Around about 2,500 years ago, this guy named Sun Tzu lived. He became a general for the state of Wu in order to prevent an oppressor from taking over the state. So what do we know about him? Well, he was a philosopher and he was a military tactician. And he was very good at both. He's accredited, perhaps the reason we know him best is he's accredited with writing a book called The Art of War. Whether or not he really wrote the book, well, scholars debate that. There's evidence to indicate that he took a series of manuscripts and put them together to form a roadmap on how to win a war. And there's debate on whether or not he did that or he actually wrote the text. And 'cause shortly after he won the war for the state of Wu, he disappeared into history. So we don't really know. We know it's a well thought out text. It's used for not only warfare, but it's used for progression in business. It's used for advancement in politics. I would dare say that if I went to Washington, D.C., or I went to the Parliament buildings in Ottawa, I would find copies of it scattered in amongst the books of politicians. And I would probably find it on a regular basis. Clausewitz, who we're going to talk about a little later in the course, was a Prussian general, and he said, war is nothing more than the continuation of politics just by different means. And I think Clausewitz and I think Sun Tzu had basically had the same philosophy with regards to war and politics. One is a continuation of the other. So what's in the book? Well, the very first line in the book is war is a matter of vital importance to the state. It is a matter of life and death. It is a matter of survival and ruin. And I think that gives you a good summation of what the text, what the treatise is about. Sun Tzu he does not push war. He does not say in the text it's written. There's 13 chapters. Each of the chapters give you a highlight and then an overview explaining the highlight. And in several cases, he mentions right off of the get-go that war is probably not the best thing to do most of the time. And I'll give you an example of that. He says quite plainly, no nation has ever benefited from prolonged war. He also says the angry can be appeased, but the dead cannot be brought back to life. And that should speak volumes to you. What else? He says to win 100 battles. If you win 100 battles, that is not the height of skill. To subdue your enemy without fighting, that is the height of skill. Okay, so the treatise is not entirely about going to war. It mentions that there are reasons that you should not go to war in the first place. Now, we can use that in comparison to states, and that's a great ideology. But you also have to think about that from your own perspective. Think about how you could use that. Rather than get involved in an argument with an individual that you work with, look at the ramifications of that argument. Would you be better off not having the argument in the first place? Which brings us to one of the next things that Sun Tzu said. Know yourself and know your enemy, and in 100 battles you shall not be beaten. Well, I just mentioned getting into an argument with a coworker. If you do decide to get into an argument with a coworker, it would be in your best interest to know what the weaknesses of your coworker are, to know what their strengths are, to know what your strengths are, to know what your weaknesses are. It would be in your best interest to learn that if you want to win the argument with your whoever, with the person that you work with or whoever. So what else can I tell you about Sun Tzu and the Art of War? Sun Tzu makes reference to a avoid what is strong, attack what is weak. Now, how can we use that in our daily lives in relation to philosophy? Well, suppose I'm a basketball player and I'm going in for a layup. And I got two people in the key and they're standing in front of that net. So am I going to try to hit them with my shoulder and then come in and make the layup? Or am I going to sidestep and not go after what's strong, the front of the net? Am I going to sidestep around and come in from the side of the net? Attack what is weak. Just makes sense. A hockey player. Are you going to come straight into that goalie and take a wrist shot right into him? Or are you at the last minute going to try to deke around him? Avoid what is strong, attack what is weak. Pretty good philosophy. What else? Let your plans be as dark as night and then strike like a lightning bolt. So how could we use that philosophy in our modern life? I'll tell you a story. I knew a guy not very long ago. He had his eye on a piece of property. He found a piece of property that was for sale, and he decided he was going to buy it, and he was going to build a house on it. So he went to the bank and he made a meeting about when he could talk about borrowing the money to buy this piece of property. The meeting was for Friday. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, he told everybody in his town that was the best piece of property in the town. It was the best piece of property to have. The cash that the owner wanted, the amount the owner wanted, was way below what other properties that were similar listed for. It was the best deal you could get in that town on a piece of property. He told people that Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. He got the money to buy the property on Friday. Monday morning, he went to buy, or Monday evening, I guess, to buy the property off the owner. And guess what he discovered? The week before, somebody had bought the property. Now, why do you think that was? It was because the person who was buying the property was a big mouth. And he went and told everybody. Had he followed Sun Tzu's advice and let his plans be as dark as night and struck like a thunderbolt, he would have a nice house on that piece of property today. Alas, he doesn't. It's a different guy. The guy's pretty happy. It's a nice piece of property. What else can I tell you about Sun Tzu? Do not rely on sheer power to overcome an oppressor. Sun Tzu says, do not depend upon military force to overcome someone who is your enemy. Do not depend on using strength only. The best analogy I have for that would be a long time ago. I was pulling lobster traps up the side of a boat. This side of Scattery. And the skipper of the boat was a guy named Porky McNeil. And as I was reaching over the side and I was just pulling, trying to get this lobster trap up, Porky says to me, "Boy, you gotta learn how to work smarter, not harder, and use the holler to get that right up on the rail for you so you don't have to." And you know what? He was right. Work smarter, not harder. Kind of like Sun Tzu's advice. Don't depend on brute force. So what else can I tell you about Sun Tzu? He mentions orders, and he mentions in his book, The Art of War, books that credit him, he mentions that when a superior gives orders, the orders should be followed. And if the orders are not followed, it's the fault of the superior. It's the fault of the general. It's the fault of the person giving the orders. And the story that I've heard in relation to that is before he was given the job as general of Wu's army, commanding general, the ruler of the state of Wu said to him, "Well, if you think you're so good of a general, can you get these geisha girls to these palace girls to form an army?" And he says, "Yes." So what he did was he organized the girls into a bit of an army, and the next day he was to present them to the commander of the state. And when he presented them to the commander of the state, the girls marched in and stood at attention, and he said he had chosen two of the eldest of the girls to be leaders. And he said to the two eldest of the girls, okay, get the girls to demonstrate their swordsmanship skills. And the girls just giggled and laughed, and nobody did anything. So it is said Sun Tzu walked over, took the sword from one of the two elder girls, lopped off both their heads with the sword, and appointed two new girls to be leaders. The next time those ladies were asked to give a demonstration, they were very proficient. They didn't giggle. They came in and they were very proficient with their swords. Now, if that story is true, I think he went a little bit overboard. However, he does show the importance of leadership. To be a good leader, if you give an order, it better be followed. And if it's not followed, you better address the issue right then and there, or you'll never have an order that will be followed. And that's important, boys and girls, because if you go out into the world, eventually some of you are going to take leadership roles. And you're going to discover that if you give an order and it's not followed, yeah, you're not going to end up being much of a leader. Anyway, what else did he say? In order to get an enemy to do something you want them to do, entice them with something they cannot refuse. Well, I find that pretty amazing, and I'll tell you why. Because that's the basis of good salesmanship. That's the basis for good marketing. And I'll give you a couple of examples, really good ones. I go into Sobeys in the first and second week of November. I go into a grocery store, and the first thing I see is a man sitting there with a bunch of poppies in front of him. And if I'm not wearing a poppy, he says to me, "Oh, come here, no, here, I'll put this on you," and he puts the poppy on me. And if you ask how much is that, that person, that Legion member usually, will always say, the poppy is free. However, there's a can there you can donate if you want to. I would hazard a guess to say there are very, very few people that take a poppy that don't put money in the can. They don't ask for a fee for the poppies. What they do is provide you with a service. And because it's human nature, when you get provided something for nothing, you feel you are in that person's debt. And I think Sun Tzu was aware of the psychology of that premise long before most others were. He said, to move your enemy, entice them with something that they want. And that's the basic premise of marketing. Okay, so I wanted a poppy. I was enticed, I got the poppy, and I gave the person in return what they were looking for. What else can I tell you about Sun Tzu? I guess that's a good overview of the art of war. We've covered on most of the basics. And I tell you, I hope you really learned something from this book, because there's a lot you can reflect on, boys and girls. A lot. As always, boys and girls, have a nice day.